Saudações, bem-vindos mais uma vez a uma grande entrevista do Expansão. Desta vez temos a representante residente do PNUD em Angola. O nosso objetivo com a conversa de hoje é perceber um pouco melhor quais são os objetivos e os programas da organização no nosso país. Denise, thank you for having us today. May I start with the question about the United Nations Development Program? What's your objectives? What kind of programs do you implement in Angola? Because I also feel that a lot of people may ask, what is this? What kind of agency is this inside the United Nations programs and strategies? And what's your job? What do you do in Angola, leading the United Nations Development Program?
Thank you very much, Miguel, for this opportunity. What I want to say is the United Nations Development Program is the leading development agency in the UN system. What we're doing in Angola, we've been in Angola actually for quite a long time, since I believe 1975, we've been in Angola, working with the government of Angola in many areas. So we're here. Currently, we have our country program document, which actually covers from 2024 to 2028. Our document covers 4 priority areas, which are very much aligned to the government's National Development Plan. And what do we do? I mean, to make it very simple for the everyday person to understand, we are here to assist the government in ensuring that they are able to implement their national development priorities. What are some of the areas that we're working in? And I think explaining what our 4 priority areas will very much be better for people to understand. Sure. The first area that we're working on is diversification. Everyone knows that Angola wants to diversify from fossil fuel to something else, and many other things. But what we're doing is actually trying to see how we can support them in this initiative. One of the areas you see in Angola, and you're very familiar, probably more than I am, is that there is a large youth population. There is a huge informal sector. How do we work with them to first try to convince them to formalize themselves? Because the informal sector is a huge component of the country right now in terms of
80%
economic.
of the economy
Exactly.
around
Exactly.
this.
Then you have over 70% of a young population in Angola who's between the age of 15 and 25. So how do we build their capacity and work with the government of Angola to ensure that the government gets the best, but also the people get the best? We know that the government is very focused on agriculture, but we know that you need to build human capital in order to do that. We know that entrepreneurship is important. So how do we build the entrepreneurship skills of the people? You can't go into business when you don't have the basic skills in order to be able to operate in an environment. And so those are the things, some of the areas we're trying to work on.
These areas are the priorities that you identify as the main road to the diversification: the youth, the agriculture, and
Building capacity,
building capacity,
digital literacy, financial literacy, building their skills with TVETs. While education is important, we do know that there is a young population that may not be educated in the formal way we think of education. So you build them through, technical vocational training, which is also very important for the society.
But this is a broader perspective. When you go into more detailing, what kind of programs, ideas, and priorities do you feel that the country should follow to try to put these ideas in place? You identified the priorities, the areas. When you talk about education, human capital, what do you think the focus should be exactly? Can you give some examples?
It's very broad, because when you think about human capital, you don't think of human capital just in one sector. You think of human capital in the area of, if we talk about the areas that we work in, the health sector, the health sector, there is a need for human capital improvement, right? And that's why we're working with the government of Angola through the Ministry of Health on the Global Fund, which I'll talk about as one of the priority areas. When you talk about entrepreneurship, you need to build the capacity of young people, training them. And so some of the initiatives that we've done is actually working with the young people in building their capacity, like we talked about, in digital literacy, in financial literacy, with a number of organizations. And we're doing that now. And other organizations in the country have asked us to work with them to do that. Moving the informal sector to the formal sector. There is a need to build capacity. There is a need to also build the trust of those informal sectors to move into the formal, because we know globally, and it's not just for Angola, globally, the social contract between people and governments is very fragmented. And so we are the ones who try to also support government in really trying to get people to move from one sector to the other. Because in that sector of informality, there are no taxes being paid. How do you convince someone to pay taxes because it can benefit them in social
Some
services that
people
they
say
need and
that you have
protection?
to make an arrangement to try to push these people to go into maybe with tax waivers
Or
or maybe
reduced tax
or
rate
reduce
depending
taxes.
on their income
Do
status.
you agree with this perspective that you have to put in places something for the people to push the people and say you will gain something if you go to the into the formal sector? Because sometimes we feel that the people say, well, I will be paying taxes, I'll have more expenses, let's say, to put my business in place, so it's better for me to keep it outside from the formal sector. Do you agree with this
And so
perspective?
that's
What kind of public policies can you put in place to push these people to go into the
I think
formality?
governments, like any other government in Angola, has to demonstrate that whatever income they're generating from the public, that income is being used in a way that people can feel comfortable.
That's very relevant to build
Access to
confidence and
social
everything.
protection, um, access to good health care, subsidize some kind of form of health care for those who cannot afford it, um, making sure that the garbage is picked up, that you have access to electricity, those basic things. If people can feel comfortable that and when they're in a financial state or when they're in need, that the government has the social protection available for them, then you convince
Do
them.
you feel that also people have to make sense that when they are paying, let's say, a tax for something, for they must receive in some public service in return? Do you feel that people when people start paying taxes, all becomes a more informed citizen and can also push the government and the public institution saying, well, I'm paying my taxes, please give back the public service like the garbage, the health care and everything. Do you feel that this is makes also some difference in the social contract when we are paying taxes? We become a more informed citizen, and it makes a difference in the relationship between the society and the people and the government. Do you agree with this?
Definitely. We know that there is a need to build the awareness of the citizens as well. There is a responsibility that citizens have. It's not just government's responsibility. There is a responsibility to
And sometimes
citizens.
when we are paying for something, let's say taxes, you feel like, well,
I'm
paying,
contributing
I'm
to,
contributing, and
and I should
I
receive
should
in
receive in
return.
return something.
Let me give you an example of something very simple that I always say. When you're driving in your car, the government does not put the garbage in the streets. It's the citizens that are doing that. Therefore, it's a responsibility of our citizens to also make sure that they're also helping to facilitate the responsibility that government has. The reason why we have, when it rains in Angola and there is garbage, the government is not the one putting the garbage in the streets. It's the citizens who are
But
doing that.
sometimes I feel like the people, let's say generally, feel like, well, what am I paying for? When I pay my tax, what kind of public service I receive in return?
There
And
is public
sometimes it had
service.
this feeling of let's say I'm not inside of this political scheme, let's say.
There is public service. Can the public service be improved? That's generally anywhere in the world it can be improved. Can it be extended to more citizens? Of course it can be. But we must also understand that there are limitations in terms of if you're not paying taxes, then you cannot ask for services. You have to also contribute. So it's a give and take. We know that there is a need for government to improve in some ways, and as well as citizens, but it has to be done collectively. And that's why I'm saying UNDP supporting the move transition from the informal to the formal. It will improve government's revenue, increase government revenue. It will give the citizens an opportunity to demand better services, but it also is a way of us also building the capacity of the citizens to understand that while you're paying everything, you also have to do more than just pay your taxes. There's more that's required from you. So that's one of the areas. And let me just go through the other three areas.
Okay.
The second area has to do with provision of access to services, and that's predominantly the Global Fund grant. UNDP, since 2021, has been designated the principal recipient of the Global Fund grant. Last year, it was a grant totaling about $100 million from 2021, I believe, to 2024. And it had to do predominantly with HIV, AIDS, malaria, and TB. And then there was a component for COVID. And because the government, I think, pretty much managed COVID quite well, that money was then used to, we're building oxygen plants for the government in, I think, about 8 municipalities. Then you have, and this year we have the Global Fund grant. It's 126 million. It's from the period 2024, July, to 2027, where we're supporting the government in 3 provinces: BA, Benguela, and Kwanza-Sul. It's a sub-regional project that, it's just started in the 2021 grant. And then we have climate change. We know that adaptation to climate change, making sure we're a more resilient nation. We see it happening in the South with droughts. We see it happening with floods. How do we make Angola more resilient to the impacts of climate change? And then lastly, the area of governance, good governance. And I think that's where we talk about in terms of the social contract. How do we support the government in having a good and inclusive governance structure? So those are the 4 basic areas, and we work in many initiatives that we try to support the government, but also we work with other partners, civil society, NGOs, bilateral partners that the government has, and so forth and so on.
When we talk about climate change, I feel like there's a big connection between this perspective and the diversification of the economy. Do you also agree that we have intertwined issues here between diversification, climate change, how the country should address these challenges? Because as you said, the country, especially in the south, we already can see with our own eyes the impacts of the climate change and things that are changing on that sense. What's your perspective? What kind of programs? This is a priority for the UNDP?
Yes, it is a priority for us because we know the impact of climate change. We see it happening globally. While Africa is not a big contributor to the impact of climate
But
change, we
it's
are feeling the effects. And so I think that's where when the African nations go to COP and the Caribbean nations is pushing for those who are contributing to it to actually give more funding. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it happen. What are we doing in this sense? We know that Angola, about 48, almost, let's just say almost 50% of the population does not have access to electricity and water. And what we're trying to do in that sense is how do you use renewable energy? how does the government also use the gift that they have been blessed with in terms of the radiation to actually have more renewable energy and green hydrogen. So we've supported the government through the Ministry of Environment on having conferences on green hydrogen. We've supported them on renewable energy. We've supported them and worked with them in terms of recycling, how we can do better recycling in our country to reduce the impact in our waters and on our land, working with development partners as well. It is so interlinked: development, diversification, and also the impact of climate change. And so it's so important. We're recently, our project is ending right now, where we had a project called Frezon with the European Union
Yes.
and UNDP and also FAO and Comanche
To build resilience.
to build resilience. And one of the things that we did in the South was actually in terms of building early warning systems. So at least that the provincial governments have the ability to get that early warning of the impact of El Nino and other disasters that are happening, and
And
then
the
put
system
in
is
a
already in
measure.
place and is
The
working.
system is in place currently in Wheeler, and it's quite new, but they've gotten a lot of training. And then Namib also has the system, and it's going to be in place currently soon.
As we know, Angola is a country very dependent on the oil sector and everything that has a big impact or can have a big impact on the climate and everything. How in a country this with this profile like Angola, what kind of strategies should be in place to address climate change without shutting down the oil sector and the extractive industries as a whole? In your perspective, what should be the approach for countries with this profile?
So, like any country in the world, there is a national determined contribution. And actually, it is a roadmap or a strategy on how to make your country more resilient in terms of, I mean, I'm just trying to make it very basic. And so, what are some of the things that Angola can do? And it's part of that NDC plan: planting trees. Planting trees will reduce the carbon emission and also make your country much cooler. Having more access to renewable energy and reducing your dependency on the oil sector. Um, while the UN ideally or the world would like to see countries move totally away from the oil, it's not realistic. And I will sit here and say it's not realistic
For countries like Angola,
exactly, who's
more
been very
specifically.
dependent, and a large percentage of their revenue comes from there. But you can have a transition, and you can also try to do it in a more environmentally friendly way. And what are you doing to combat the impact that you're having? What are you doing in terms of the initiatives that you're doing? And that's why I think it's important to continue to engage with the government and work with the government, because there are other ways. It is not my responsibility as the United Nations Development Program head to tell the government to stop working on fossil fuel. It is, we encourage them in terms of finding alternatives, which is renewable energy or green hydrogen, something that's more
Because sometimes
sustainable.
I understand what you're saying, because sometimes we know that people say, well, what's the role of the United Nations? Our government is doing this and that. The United Nations should say to the government, should push the government to do this and that. But that's not your goal and the way the United Nations work, isn't it? You are a partner with the government, so we work together with the government. We are not clashing with the government. It's like this. How do you manage this pressure from the society and the pressure also with your relations with the institutions and the governments and everything? How do you manage this?
Our responsibility is to work with the government to ensure that their national priorities are attained. Um, will we always agree? Of course not. But our job is to work with the government to make sure that we come together as much as we can to work for the development of the country And when, talking about the country is not just the government in power, it's talking about the people. How do we transform lives? How do we make people's lives more sustainable and better?
And how do you convince your partners to
So
discuss this and to build common goals and common programs? It's like
exactly.
this.
And that's why we work very well with the government in terms of the alignment of the work that we do. Our country program document is very much aligned to the government of Angola. We were even involved in supporting the government or working with the government in their own national development plan. And so it's not as though we are here to tell the government what to do. We're here to work with the government. And the advantage that UNDP has is that we are in 170 countries and territories around the world. Therefore, we can
And you
bring
are
an
there,
idea.
and you are there for the future. You are not
Exactly. We're not
doing
here
some
just
programs
for,
and then close your
exactly.
representation and go. No, no, you are here to
Exactly.
stay.
And it's long term. Development is long term. And that's why sometimes people want to see immediate impact. You can't see immediate impact because development is a long term journey. And so we see, yes, are there challenges in Angola? Everyone will say there are challenges, like anywhere else in the world. But what are we doing together to ensure that we transform the
And
lives of
sometimes it's
people?
very important to have a strategy. Well, what's our focus? Where is our focus? What's our priorities? Do you agree with this perspective? Do you feel that Angola has already reached this point of have a strategy, a robust and relevant
There is a
strategy
strategy.
for the development? Because I'm asking this because sometimes we have national conversations and debates about what's the government strategy. Are they well identified? Maybe we should have more conversations about this. Sometimes we have some doubts about the global strategy for the country and for the future. What's your
The
take on
government
this?
does have a strategy. They have their national development
Yes, we know
plan.
about this. Sometimes we are talking about the content.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But you see, it's a journey, and that's what I'm saying. It is not going to happen in a 4-year document, or it's going to take time. And so the government's priority right now, and I'm not speaking for the government, but I'm just saying their priority now, which is very much aligned to us, is how do we diversify the economy? One of the ways is they're looking at agriculture. How do we support them in having agriculture become thriving? Of course, there's an investment that has to be made. And how do the people benefit from that? We want to support Angola to reduce the need for imports. At one point in history, Angola was a big exporter. How do we now bring Angola back to that? And one of the ways is how do we build the capacity of the youth to take them back into the provinces? Because they're filling up the urban areas, but if you open up opportunities for them to be able to go back into the rural areas, it can be very thriving. And countries have done it. And so we're trying to see how we can do it in our little area, but also supporting the government to be able to do that. And there are a number of initiatives that we're working with the government on right now to open up that space for youth to thrive in agriculture, bringing technology, bringing artificial intelligence, bringing innovative ways of doing agriculture so that they become that interest is there and they go back into the provinces. The government priority is also human capital. Without a thriving and a strong human capital, you cannot have success in your development. And so the government's focus is on that. And that's where there are lots of programs in building capacity as well. And you cannot have a thriving human capital if you don't have a healthy society. So you see how there's an interlink with everything that needs to happen. And so that's what we're trying to continuously work with the government on and advocate for that. We're actually working for the government because they're in the member states. And so we're here because the government of Angola believes that UNDP is able to provide some kind of support. We don't come with a lot of money in the UN. What we come with is that capacity and that technical know-how because we can take it from country A and put it into the context of country B. And so Angola has a development plan. They have a strategy. But as human beings, we want things to happen now. Are there challenges? Yes, with getting things implemented. But it's a journey that you take every day to continuously work with government, civil society, NGOs, and so forth, other development partners to make sure that this happens.
When we talk about the agriculture, and you said that one of the main the main things that the UNDP has, it has a lot of information from different countries and from different examples. Is there any other project, any other program in other country that you see that can be an interesting experience for Angola to look into when we talk about agriculture? Is there anything that you can recall that you see that it is interesting as a model, as a
There are
development?
several programs that have been done, either through UNDP in other countries, and also from other examples of success.
But I'm asking that you can give us some interesting examples of things that happen in other countries that can be also be applied or can serve as a benchmark for Angola in agriculture, let's say.
What I would say is, if I think of one of the examples, if I'm not mistaken, Tanzania has done a very good job in some initiatives that they've started. I actually put that in my an op-ed that I did with Al Jazeera in terms of some of the initiatives that have happened. Nigeria has done, there's a company in Nigeria that has been working with young people to not only have sustainable farming, but also to be able to produce agriculture in a way that really can support the economy of the country. We have, I think, in Asia Pacific, where there are examples that have been done in terms of sustainable farming.
When we talk to access to technology, we know that in Asia you have like these small technology processes with not that very elaborate things, but with simple things that can really push the agriculture forward and the production can go ahead. Is this kind of things that you are looking to
Exactly.
and try to talk with the partners, with the government, and also with civil society organizations to try to show these kind of things and show how can this be applied also in Angola? Is this kind of
And let me give you an example. We are working with Innofolk. I think it's in Matala that we're working with them. And what we have been able to work with them on is to support the school, not only in solar and renewable energy, but we also supported them in terms of helping them in terms of some farming that they're doing. So they've been able to plant things, they've been able to have chicken and that kind of thing to be able, and they're seeing that it's generating revenue for their communities, and also that they're able to increase their production. While it is beautiful to look at very large projects, sometimes those community-based initiatives can help increase capacity, can help production, can help livelihoods in communities. We're not saying that we can't do the big ones, but we're also saying that you can start at small
and also they
scale.
can they can be related in some sense. The small farming farmers
Exactly,
can
small
also
scale farming.
can have some relation with the biggest one. They
Exactly.
can
Coming together
sell
as
their product.
cooperatives, how do you work together? So some of the initiatives that we're doing, for example, we have an initiative called Kurima, where we're actually working with communities, women, in terms of taking their products and how do they start. One of the ones we're trying to do in Umpata is try to help them, and the municipality is actually working with them to get their products actually at the grade, the standard, to be put into supermarkets. These women's lives have been transformed. They never did this before, but it's an opportunity for them.
They
They
have
can
access
feed
to
their
market
family.
to the
Exactly.
market.
They can feed their families. They're able to go and sell their products in the market, in the small scale market. And then potential is they can eventually get it into the supermarkets. So starting small scale is also just as good as starting, from very big scale. And we can do that together. It doesn't have to be one or the other, before you do the small and then start the big or whatever. You can start and you can do it. It can be parallel in your
Sometimes people
support.
say things like this. Well, in Angola, sometimes we feel like do you always want to do big projects and big things. Do you feel that this perspective is changing between the leaders and the political institutions and the public institutions? You have more sensibility to small scale projects and to things that can have a big impact in communities, or you still think that you have work to do in kind of this
Well, I think it's a
organizing
work
this
in
perspective
progress. It's a
perspective.
work in progress. The government does have the capacity to do the big things. From a UNDP perspective, we don't have the capacity to do big things because we have to have the resources. And our resources come from either government giving us domestic resources, or our resources come from partners that we can get. Exactly. So what we do is we try, and they've seen some of the results of something that we do on small scale. Government appreciates that, because while they're focusing on getting to the masses, we are also doing some initiatives, and I think government
And this can
appreciates
be
that.
complementary actions,
Exactly.
isn't it? Some partners or some institutions, or let's say the government, on other ones are focusing on bigger things, and then you have other strategies working for small scale projects and everything. Do you feel that this is a good perspective to?
Of course it is. There are many countries where initiatives started as a pilot and government saw it and they scaled it up.
That's another
And
perspective,
so that's the
another option.
idea. That's the idea. Renewable energy is something that we're doing in many communities. We've had the opportunity to give access
Yep.
to electricity to thousands of
These small
communities.
small scale projects also can serve as an experiment, and if it
Exactly.
works well, you can then
Exactly.
open
Exactly.
the.
Exactly.
But talking again about health again, because I want just to ask you about the Angola's relation with Global Fund and everything. Also, health is a very important issue everywhere, not only in Angola, but Angola has had some problems in this relation with Global Fund, some projects that maybe was management problem, judicial things, court people on the courts because of managing these funds. What's the point right now, and how is this relation between Angola and the Global Fund right now? How can you describe this?
So I believe it was in 2020, or earlier, when there were challenges with Global Fund and the government of Angola, and they brought them into a safeguard measure. I think that's what's called a safeguard measure. And as a result of that safeguard measure, they then had to find a principal recipient. And that's when UNDP became the principal recipient. That is not in isolation to Angola. There are other countries who have done that. And that's where I think the support that we're giving the Ministry of Health is to help to see how we can build their capacity. The ministry has also asked for that. How do we support them in financial management, logistical management, procurement, monitoring and evaluation? Those are things that we're working with them. Our hope is that eventually we will continue working well with the government with the Ministry of Health, in order for one day for them to become the principal recipient. That is our role. The principal recipient role that we have been given as UNDP is temporary. And while we are doing that, our job is to continuously work with the government through the Ministry of Health for them to eventually take on that role as principal recipient in the future. So, well, I can't say much about what happened because I wasn't in the ministry. I don't know. Obviously, there were challenges. However, the idea is that while we are the principal recipient, we continue to work with them to build their capacity. But they also are working to build their own capacity with resources, either domestically or resources from some loans that they have. And so our idea is, how do we come together to integrate all of these supports so that the health workers get the best on the job training they need, to be able to carry on the work, and then also that the government can eventually become the principal recipient again.
Health is also very well connected with development, sustainable goals. And this is an ongoing project, let's say a global ongoing project. We know that we also have some challenges. No, I'm not talking about just in Angola. Globally, we have some challenges with this idea. How can you describe the Angola's road to the sustainable development goals, and what are we doing right now, and where are we right now in this program?
On the it's called the voluntary national review, which is done every 4 years on the progress of Angola, of globally, but countries are designated. Unfortunately, I can't speak on where Angola is currently on that, because in the middle of this month, the government will be making a presentation. The state minister will be making a presentation in the high level forum in New York. What I can say is that globally, we have seen that the sustainable development goals are lagging. We have about 1/3 of the goals that are progressing. We have another 50% that's moving really slowly. And then we have like about 18% that have completely regressed. Of course, we know it's because of COVID and whatever other financial situations
It's
that
a
have
sad
happened.
description in some sense.
It is, but I don't think it's something that we can lose hope on. It's something that you have to continuously strive for. Will we achieve the Sustainable Development Goal in 2030? Of course not. But we can continue to make strides. And so we have been working with the government, UNDP and the UN agencies have worked with the government on the voluntary national review, and the reports will be made available, but we're not in a position to share the results of it until they officially make it, they publish it globally. So later on this year, I think we'll be able to have that information available.
Angola also is very well known as a growing population, one of the fastest growing populations in the world. Do you feel that this is a challenge to the sustainable to the SDGs and to comply with these perspectives and with
It is a
idea?
challenge.
Because you have the demand is growing every year, and it's a strong
A
demand,
million births.
a million births every year. So for the public institution, also for the private to provide services to the population, the demand is always bigger than what we are doing right now. So this is a big challenge for a country like Angola, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think the president has even acknowledged that is a challenge to have a million births a year. Again, it's about citizens. It's a responsibility of a citizen to also not put a lot of burden on the society. But it's almost a cultural thing. How do you convince a family that a bigger family is not better? But it's that constant awareness, and that's where I think that engagement of making people aware. We're not saying don't have children. We're saying that you have to have also responsibility and accountability.
And this is also very well connected to the health services as a whole,
Exactly.
the familiar planning, the
Family
access to.
planning, access to good quality health, access to schools. I mean, it puts a strain, and I'm not sure if many countries can handle a million births a year. So it's something that we also, well, I'm saying we as citizens of Angola have to also make that initiative to be conscious of that. But again, it's a cultural thing, and it takes time to change that. But it is a strain on the country, because it's I mean, the average family is about 6 or 7, which is quite large, and in the rural area, it's much larger. So it's something that the government, I think, they're aware of it. And because it's not our area, we don't deal a lot in that area. That would be more of UNFPA or UNICEF. but it is something that the government is aware of, and they have to find ways, and we're here to work with them to find ways as the UN.
You talked about the rural areas, and also in connection with the SDGs, maybe there is an interesting debate and conversation to have about the relationship between the rural and the urban areas. What do you feel about it? Do you think also that in Angola we should prioritize how to put in place things to put these two, it seems like different worlds, but they are not. They are complementary. The rural areas, or should be complementary, and the urban areas. This is relevant. It's important for you, for the country also to assess this kind of issues.
Definitely. What you want to do is, let's remove the fact about sustainable development goals in terms of development. You want to build the capacity of the rural areas so that they're not dependent on central or the urban areas. And so this is one of the things we're talking about. How do you build their capacity to be able to feed themselves? A simple thing is, how do you build the capacity for them to garden, home gardening, backyard gardening, school gardening, so that they're feeding themselves? How do you build their capacity in terms of, if you're giving them access to renewable energy, to maintain that renewable energy, and to also try to find livelihood from the renewable energy? So there are many ways you can work with them. So what we're doing at central level, you also have to take down to rural level, building their capacity, that if the municipalities are eventually able to manage
And in Angola, we have
resources.
a big challenge with this access to public services and everything
Exactly.
between the rural and the urban areas. Maybe this is one of the biggest challenges in
Yes.
Angola.
And one of the areas in the area of governance that we've been looking at is working with the Provedoria, where we've actually put in virtual access centers in a number of provinces, where people can actually, because she is the advocate for the people, in terms of, people going there and able to express where services are not at the best, to help government to identify and
And
improve
maybe
the
maybe
services.
also the government and public institutions also have like a big opportunity with the technology we have right now. Maybe there's a lot of things that you can do in access to health, to in public information, to education
Yes.
using the technology. Do you feel that the government is looking to this kind of thing, but should push forward the this kind of projects and the public
Government has
programs
set, and based on our meetings and
using
discussion,
technology
using technology.
to improve access to public
Exactly,
service and everything.
exactly. But again, it's building the awareness and the citizens feeling comfortable to do that. But I am aware of the fact that in discussions with government, they are looking to use technology through artificial intelligence to really improve access to service. But you have to build the capacity, and it takes time to do that, to build the capacity of the citizens to be able to have to trust that they can use their mobile phones to do banking, their mobile phones to pay their bills. We're doing it now, but I think it needs to be at a much higher scale. And I think it's a work in progress.
I have just more 2 or 3 questions to finish our conversation. Maybe I will ask you about more of a global perspective, not only focused on Angola, about multilateralism and the moment we're living today in the world with with challenges accessing the funding and everything. As a UN representative, and how do you feel it? Are you worried about the context right now?
We're in a very challenging time globally. Even the UN is facing global challenges in terms of resources. And I think multilateralism, or the UN system, is more needed now than ever before. And my perspective is, we will go through this. There is a need for, of course, us to rethink how we operate. There's a need for more regional, continental coming together. I think this is a time for Africa to really come together and rise up. We are a well-endowed continent. And I think we need to come together to use our resources well. We are very blessed to have a huge youth population that the rest of the world does not have. And how do we harness that youth population to really transform
So
our
even in
continent?
times of crisis, we have a lot of
We
opportunity.
have so many opportunities. And that's where UNDP is even working on an initiative that we have called Timbuktu, which we're working with the government to initiate, to provide spaces for young people to thrive. Our young people are innovative. Our young people have solutions to local challenges on the ground. We need to give them a space to thrive because many other continents do not have what we have. We have our youth. We're endowed with very good natural resources. We have beautiful landscapes. We have it all. And I think this is the time for Africa to rise. It's never been more important than now. And I think with all the challenges, Africa is well placed to transform our continent if we can do that. The rest of the world, of course, we will all go through this process, and I think we'll come out better. I think if people look at many years ago in early times, you wouldn't have thought that you would make it through. As close as COVID, we went through a very difficult time for a couple of years, and we've come through it. And so it's the same. I think we will come through it. There are uncertainties. I'm not worried. What I think about
You're
is
not worried
what
about the funding cuts
I'm
and
not
everything.
worried about
This
that.
can have, and this is happening. We
I
feel
I
it in countries like Angola, in the position from the United States, closing development agencies, retrieving funding from a lot of international bodies and everything. This is not
I'm
a
not worried
problem.
about
I'm
that.
not
What
with
I
this.
think Africa needs to do is use its resources, very well endowed resources, well. We just need to have better use of our domestic resources. There are many countries in Africa that are currently using their domestic resources to build their country in a number of ways, and UNDP is one of those agencies that are helping them to do that. If we look at DRC, they've given UNDP over, I think, $400 million to build their development. We have Gabon who has done this as well. We have Togo who has done it. We have Senegal who has done that. So our countries have the resources. I think what we have to do now is have better use of our resources so that we can have multiplying effects on the development we have. So I'm not as concerned, worried, let me say. We have to think differently. We have to innovate our thinking. We have to think better and see the limited resources we have. How do we use it better for our development?
Do you think that in that perspective that African countries relied a lot in this kind of funding, international funding, and this can even bring political questions about the reliance, the dependence to the biggest donors, to the more powerful countries. Do you see it as also an opportunity to change this game, let's say?
Yes, and we've seen countries, if
I'm
I'm
sure
not
you've
mistaken,
know this very well,
who
this
we've
kind of
seen
relations
countries
between countries.
who have been able to come in and fill in the gap from the lack of resources from countries that have reduced their fundings. We've seen it happen. So it's not impossible.
It's also an important as an affirmative position to the country say, well, we are good with whoever wants to support our initiative, but we also have
We have the
our
capacity,
the
exactly,
resources and the capacity, and even if we don't have, you can work
towards it.
towards it.
Yes.
It
I think there are countries doing it, and I think more African countries need to do that.
Do
That
you
we,
think that Angola is doing that?
well, I stand to be corrected. Angola was not as impacted in terms of what has happened,
That
for example, with the closure of it. Yes, there are areas, but it's not as impacted as other countries. And so I think we're in a much better state than countries that actually had a huge gap in their health system. Fortunately, Global Fund was not as impacted. We do have some impacts, but not as impacted. But the government has been able to pretty much, is there room for improvement? Of course there is room for improvement. But that's with any country in the world. There's room for improvement. And so how you continuously work towards it. But Africa has the opportunity to really rise up and you know, that when the next wave comes of support, it would be more on a partnership rather than a donor.
Yeah, on a dependence
Yeah,
relation.
the dependency will be quite less. Yes.
Thank you, Denise. I
Thank
don't
you
have
very
any more
much,
questions.
Miguel. Wonderful. Thank you so
It was a
much.
good conversation, and I have to thank you for that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Foi a nossa entrevista. Voltamos na próxima oportunidade. Estamos juntos.